Life of David Livingstone, Part 46, beginning of Chapter 21, The Desert of Sahara. An opinion quite exclusively prevails that the Desert of Sahara is a vast, treeless plain, a level expanse of high, hot, dreary sand, that nothing to disturb the awful monotony but an occasional caravan winding its way wearily through a pathless waste, or the dreadful simoon driving the sands from their accustomed place and hurling them wildly whithersoever it will. Such indeed would be no very inaccurate description of many portions, some of them considerable in extent, of this immense waste. But if such were taken as a picture of the whole, it would convey a false impression. Perhaps the first idea which occupies one's mind in thinking of Sahara is in regard to the prodigious extent. Its western boundary is the Atlantic Ocean, whose waves wash these arid sands from Cape Nun at the southern extremity of Morocco to the mouth of the river Senegal, a distance of more than 1,000 miles. Thence it extends eastward about 3,000 miles to the valley of the Nile. It is estimated that within the limits of thus generally described there is an area of somewhere around 2 million square miles, being about 10 times as great as the area of France, and more than 20 times greater than that of England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland combined. It is to be furthermore considered that Sahara, vast as it is, embraces less than half of the desert system, if we may so speak, of which it forms the western portion, for, as is elsewhere remarked, it pushes itself, after interruption by the Nile, the rocky regions of Nubia and Abyssinia, and the Red Sea, through Arabia, and thousands of miles eastward to far within the boundaries of the Celestial Empire. The area of whole is probably about 7 million square miles, or something more than that of Europe and the United States, but Sahara itself in North Africa has 3 times the extent of the Mediterranean Sea. So vast an expanse, with so much of it uninhabitable and unproductive, traversable by only those ships of the desert, the patient camels, must impress the mind with gloomy reflections, to be replaced by brighter ones only upon considering further that the wonderful workings of nature hence have been born, and are constantly being borne, upon the wings of the viewless winds, the great blessings to the best proportions of mankind. The western portion of Sahara, which is called Sahel, is far more desolate than the eastern portion. In the latter part there are more oases, which are inhabitable and productive. Thus we have not far from the valley of the Nile an oasis of Darfur, El Wah, great oasis, Takel, and some others, and of which the first named is the greatest and furthest south. Northward is the oasis of Siwa, or Jupiter, Armun Alugia farther west, and the great oasis of Fezzan, with the important city of Murzuk. The oasis of Er-o-Besen is in the south-central part of the desert, between this and the Atlantic Ocean, and the west, and Morocco and Algeria to the north. The expanse is as desolate a region, perhaps, as there is anywhere on the globe. For a considerable distance from the ocean, the scene is a bleak plain of sand, except in a portion near Senegambia, where many acacias are to be found, the trees which furnish the gum arabic of commerce. This region has a considerable elevation, however, and the shore consists of sandstone, generally about 100 feet high, while there are many low plains covered with drifting sands. Their desolation only increased in places by widespread coatings of salt and vast fields of naked rock upon which one might journey for days together without seeing a grain of sand or a sign of vegetation or animal life. Yet the Sahara may be generally described as a region of elevated plateaus, frequently rising to mountains of 5,000 elevation feet, separated from each other by valleys and immense tracts of sand. Traversing the desert from Tripoli, one reaches the summit of the Garayan Plateau at an elevation of 2,000 feet, whence it gradually slopes away to 500 feet, and in some places even below sea level. Further on is a long range of tableland called the Hamada, stretching east and west with an elevation of almost 1,500 feet. Toward the west, Hamada becomes mountainous, and toward the east it breaks into a vast scene of huge cliffs called El Haraj. Toward the Mediterranean, on the whole plateau of Hamada and that of Merzuk, are dry channels called wadis and small deserts. Then the route ascends several hundred feet, and passing over a sandy region with some expanse of bare granite and the elevation above sea to 2,200 feet, continues to the mountainous region between Got and Aspen, where there is a wadi at an elevation of 3,000 feet amid mountain peaks no less than 4,000. Still further south, the average elevation is believed by Barth to be about 1,900 feet. Vogel discovered similar features in the eastern portions of the desert and concluded that Sahara was a vast plateau, formulation of the general height of about 12 to 1,500 feet. Natives reported to him that there were high mountains in the southern part of the desert, and two ranges, the Borgohu and the Madagashunga, were especially spoken of as so elevated that the inhabitants dress in furs. Further west, the explorer Barth found the Tarks, clad in woolen and some in furs, and the greatest expanse of the sand and salt is between Aspen and Timbuktu, and thence on west to the ocean. Hence, caravan from Morocco to Timbuktu have met with more difficulties and endured more sufferings than those which traversed from the desert of Tripoli or Cairo. In many portions of the western desert, the western waste of Sahara, have been found marine shells of recent species, showing that at no very remote geological period these now arid plains formed the bed of an ocean. Not only so, but most astonishingly, changes have here occurred within what is commonly called the historic period. Careful investigations have discovered unknown cities are buried beneath the drifting sands of western Sahara, and where in former ages the fertile territories there is now only bleak and barren waste. It's interesting to speculate upon the question, who were the people thus engulfed by the sands of the Sahara? The substantial nature of their buildings, in so far as have been disentombed, would appear to make it certain that they far surpassed in art and civilization any of the tribes which now live near the scenes of the invisible ruins. There are but two people of whom we have historic knowledge, inhabitants of Africa, whose might have occupied these buried cities and cultivated the fruitful territories of the olden time long ago. These are the Egyptian and the Carthaginians. The ruins can hardly be those of the Egyptians, for they were essentially a stationary people. For ages they remained where they emigrated, or where they established themselves after their first migration. In the era of Carthage, if the era of Carthage were early enough to account for these sand-submerged cities, it might not be unreasonable to claim that they may have belonged to the race of which Hannibal was one of the great minds. And the remarkable fact that through that Carthage was unquestionably one of the most powerful nations of antiquity, nothing remains by her own authority of her history may be regarded as one of those mysterious coincidences of engulfment considered in connection with the burial of the entombment of the cities of Sahara, for which we cannot account and which yet have a powerful effect not only upon the imagination but the reason. Carthage left nothing of her literature, her art, her language. With the exception of a few coins, there are no monuments remaining, even of a commerce whose sails whitened every known sea. And yet the nation of which absolutely nothing remains was able, on the very day when the Greeks defeated Xerxes at Salamis, to bring into action 300,000 men. In Sicily, it is doubtful whether England could transport a large army across the British Channel today. So large an army across the British Channel today, though in after times when Carthage maintained her wars with Rome, her armies were not so large, yet the country must have been both extensive and populous, which could at once transport an army of 100,000 men across the Mediterranean. No less, with large numbers of horses, was the force which Hannibal embarked on his last great campaign, and with which succeeded after various fortunes in thundering at the very gates of Rome. Regions of fertility and dense population round about Carthage must, it would seem but natural, have been greater in those times than now. Perhaps valuable evidences of the literature, arts, and institutions of evidences this extinguished nationality may someday be revealed under the sands of the great desert. The western portion of the desert is inhabited by Moors and Arabs who live in the tents and move about frequently from place to place. The Moors are a branch of those who dwell in Morocco. In color, they are nearly black with straight hair, slight physical frames, and slender legs. They are all able to read the Quran. Numerous tribes of the Tarakas inhabit the central portions of the desert. with the finest of the physical natures, which are a physical natures, they are a robber race. With the finest of physical natures, they are a robber race. Brave, cruel, and revengeful, but with a certain hospitality, which is the redeeming trait in the general unworthiness of their character. The Taboos occupy the eastern and least desolate portion of the desert. They much resemble the Taboos occupy the eastern and least desolate portion of the desert. They much resemble the Negroes in feature and are non-agricultural. No, they are agricultural pastoral people, living in fixed abodes. Not a few of the Taboos are pregnant. The other inhabitants of the desert, all being Mohammedans.